a tropical paradise along the equatorial belt, comprising an astounding string of 17,000 plus islands, bounded by 2 oceans, home to abundant sea life. Indonesia is the epicenter of marine biodiversity. Professional dive operators providing international standard gear and services, supported by a highly experienced dive staff. Endless underwater gems waiting to be discovered. Boasting hundreds of stunning dive sites, catering to divers of all levels. Dive breathtaking drop-offs and explore old shipwrecks and countless variety of macro life. Comfortable and friendly dive resorts and liveaboards. For exciting diving in various parts of Indonesia. An underwater sanctuary for some of the most remarkable creatures. An extraordinary display of marine life amongst our renowned national marine parks. However, vast areas are yet to be explored by divers. The heart of the world's Coral Triangle Center, home to over 1/4 of the world's marine life. With more than 600 species of coral and over 3,000 fish species. A spectacular aquatic biosphere. Unlimited underwater adventure. Diving beyond imagination. Wonderful Indonesia.
A united journey isn't just about miles traveled, but milestones reached. That turns window seats into breathtaking views. We're sharing smiles, experiences, and connections transcend language and culture. You realize you're not traveling to get away, but to get closer to yourself. Because it is travel that helps us discover that we are all more alike than we are different. And that this journey is just beginning.
Sick.
Connecting people, uniting the world.
day I woke up below the surface, where I learned to face my fears and go with the flow. But it's when I came to appreciate the big and the small, made new friends from all over, and could no longer hide my true colors, that I knew I'd emerged a local.
Hello, my dear friends. It's been a while since your last visit, but I want you to know I'm here. Here for you now and in better days ahead. Things may have slowed in your world, but it's anything but slow here. My reefs teem with colorful fish. Schooling hammerheads circle the deep. Playful dolphins roam the shallows. And gentle waves whisper, "Come back to me." I know you're spending hours dreaming of my underwater forest, of my soaring eagle rays, of my wise giant leatherback turtles, of my playful and friendly lions, of the stars that shine below, and the serenading humpback singing. And just as you are resetting, so am I. Everything is more vivid, more plentiful, brighter. I'll continue to surprise you more than ever before. We're always connecting, you and I. In me, you seek solace. And I promise to heal you and delight you. My creatures are calling. A new adventure is waiting. I'll see you soon.
He can sense his spirit and like a feather take Our island is a gift that we have shared with the world. But in the stillness of today, our island is asking everyone to give us a moment. To be with our family, Ifamagonte, our children, our grandchildren, Itanota, our land, our thoughts, to be creative, Fanhongi, to have faith, to be with the things we know and the things you've come to love. Give us a moment, and we will share one together soon.
Butterflies are under my skin. I can feel the wings trembling. They will save me from falling. Waves are bringing me back to the land. 100 hands are around me, but they will save me from falling. See the flying so high, I would like to be with them.
Love the ocean, protect the ocean. Ocean Positive. Swimwear made from lost or abandoned fishing nets, recycled from the sea.
Hi everyone, welcome to ADEX Pixel Expo, and today's session is once again one of our most favorite session actually, which is in conversation with David Stride. And today, David Stride's guest is none other than Mr. Simon Pridmore. Okay, before we jump into that session itself, let me just introduce our host or moderator, David Stride, and to everyone, and a brief introduction for myself on Simon Pridmore as well. So everyone, I'm sure everyone know David Stride. Since I don't know, this is the beginning of ADEX, I'm sure. And also, if you don't know who's David Stride is actually, or shall I call him Strikey? He is the ADEX ambassador for technical diving and for ADEX all this while. And David, oh my God, Strikey has a background in military, commercial, recreational, and technical diving. Strikey is actually a regular speaker and presenter at regional and international diving events, a former field editor for Asian Diver magazine, who has authored several hundred articles about diving and organized several world-class technical diving events. He is actually the recipient of ADEX Lifetime Achievement Award last year for his great contribution to the sport of technical diving. And he's also a fellow of the Explorer Club of New York. Briefly, before I hand over to Strikey itself, I'm sure everybody heard of Simon. He's actually currently now based in Indonesia, and for over the last 25 years, Simon has actually pioneered mixed gas deep diving in Asia. And he's also been involved in technical diving training, exploration, and equipment manufacturing. So today, I'm sure during his free time, he writes book for divers. Recently, the book that he wrote was Scuba Exceptional, Become the Best Diver You Can Be, and also the book called Dining with Divers, A Taste for Adventure. Without any further ado, let's start the ball rolling. Over to you, David. Or Strikey, sorry.
Nora, thank you very much for that wonderful introduction. And ladies and gentlemen, for those of you who may not be familiar with Simon, he's also a very prolific author, having written and produced the Scuba Confidential series of books, a number of dive guides, some of which we'll talk about, and his latest book, a biography of a prominent diver in the Asian region. So, ladies and gentlemen, this is completely unrehearsed. We haven't even discussed what sort of things we're going to talk about, or indeed what order we're going to talk about them. So it's very much off the cuff. But Simon is a person that I've known for many, many years without really knowing him. And as a prelude to this evening's talk, Simon was good enough to send me through a CV. And whilst I knew a little of his background, I was absolutely fascinated at the early part of it, and particularly how Simon first got into diving, when he was, in fact, an English teacher in Oman, I believe, Simon.
Yes. You didn't know about that. We haven't talked about that before. That was new.
No, we've never covered that when we're sitting in a pub having a drink. We've covered every other thing, but
yes. Well, I mean, you want to hear the story of how I got?
Oh, yes, absolutely.
It's well, I was in Oman. I was working as a teacher, and our office hours were 7 in the morning till 12:30 midday. And beyond that, it was just too hot to do anything. So everyone went to the beach. And lying on the beach, it was too hot to lie on the beach. So normally what you did is you went into the ocean and you had a floating bar in the ocean. And the only thing above the surface was your head. And you reached up onto the bar to take a drink. And then you had a big hat on and everything else. And that's it. That was what people did at the beach, and it was all a bit limiting. And I tried windsurfing, but I wasn't gifted at windsurfing. I managed to move the windsurfer in one direction, but I could never turn it around and bring it back. So I found myself swimming the windsurfer back to the shore again. It just didn't work. And then I saw the divers going out, and I watched them go out, a few afternoons, and I thought, look, it's okay, I'll give that a try. So signed up for the course. It was a BZAC course, and the instructors were SAS consultants.
Consultants, you say?
Because this is Oman. This is where are we? We're somewhere in around the 79, 80, 81, that kind of period. And there's problems in the south with Yemen, and the SAS are in country, and they've taken over, if you like, the local dive club, because a number of them are instructors, are BZAC instructors. Anyway, they were the guys who taught us. The course must have lasted 3 months or something, and I really enjoyed it. Of course, Oman was a superb place to learn to dive. We had pet whale sharks off the coast. We had all sorts of things. We had turtles and everything. It was very good diving, and so I qualified. We did the 10th qualification dive, and got back to shore, and the chap said, "Congratulations," signed my logbook. He said, "You're teaching the next course," and I said, "Excuse me?" And he said, "Yeah." And he said, "You're a teacher, right?" I said, "Well, I am a teacher, but I've only just, I'm a new diver." He said, "You'll be fine." I said, "Well, look, do me a favor." I said, "Would you just at least sit in on my lectures just to make sure I don't say anything wrong? I don't get, I don't make any mistakes that will hurt people." And he said, "Yeah, okay, if you want." And so first class, first night, and the students are there lined up in front of him, and he comes in and pulls a chair to the back of the room, right by the door, and sits on the chair and just gives me the indication, "Right, off you go." And so I started off, and about 10 minutes in, he got up, walked out the door, never came back. And that was it. I was a dive instructor. Not official, but that was me. I was doing classwork because these guys didn't much fancy doing the classwork.
How long did you do that for?
Maybe 9, 10 months, something like that.
Right. And I take it you didn't kill anyone in the interim while you were
No, well,
teaching.
fortunately, they were there to prevent that happening.
Right.
anything I might have told them during the class was negated by the practical aspect, which I wasn't allowed anywhere near that.
Did you ever meet up with Bruce Thompson, who was over there then working for the Sultan of Oman? In the Navy.
He was in the Navy?
Yeah.
Things were very, they were very segregated. You know what an expat life is like. So I was working for the Air Force, the Sultan of Oman's Air Force.
Right.
And so we had our own beach club, if you like, and then next door the oil company had their own beach club, and the Navy had their beach club, and you very rarely socialized in between clubs. That's just how it was. So the name rings a bell, but it's not from those days. I don't know.
You'll actually, it's quite interesting because we'll cover that a little later, but he, or Bruce, Bob Kaysen and myself taught diving here. But you went on to Hong Kong, and then from being an English teacher, you became a policeman in Hong Kong.
I know. Do you want to hear the story about that, how that happened?
Well, you didn't. How did you wind up becoming a policeman in Hong Kong?
The life in Oman was pretty good. I was, 21, 22. We had, the salaries were excellent. We worked 10 weeks on, 3 weeks off. And in the 3 weeks, we went on holiday somewhere, to Sri Lanka or the Maldives or wherever nearby, or sometimes went back to the UK. But life was very good, and there were 3 of us sharing an apartment. And the other two guys both worked in the school. One was the graphic artist and the other was the photographer. And then there was me, and we would pool our resources, and we had cars, we had a Jeep, we had motorbikes, we had all the toys that you'd expect 20-somethings to have in an apartment. And we had so much free time that it was great fun, you know. And you thought, well, this will never end. And one day I came back from work, and must have been a day with no beach, and walked in, and the two of them were sitting there, and they looked at me quite soberly and said, we've got some news. And I said, what news? They said, we're going to Hong Kong. I said, what? They said, yes, we've applied for jobs with the Hong Kong Polytechnic University, which was just starting up then, and we're going to Hong Kong. And I said, well, what about me? And they said, well, you know, they weren't particularly concerned about what I did. And so a few days later, we had the Sunday papers from the UK in, and the Sunday Telegraph magazine. I was leafing through that, and I saw an advert for the Hong Kong police. And I thought, I can do that. So I went in and I said, right, we're all going to Hong Kong. I said, I'm going to go and do the interview on my next leave, my next home leave. I'm going to take the interview, and then we'll all go to Hong Kong. So next home leave, I went to Grafton Street in London, where the Hong Kong office was, did the interview, passed the interview, went to the medical in, I was going to say Carnaby Street, but it wasn't Carnaby Street, wherever all the doctors are in London, went there and passed the medical, went to New York for a couple of weeks for a holiday, and then back to Omar. Went in the house, threw my case down, said, that's it, we're off to Hong Kong. And they said, well, we're not going. I said, what? We didn't get our jobs. But by then, the thing I most wanted to be in the world was a Hong Kong policeman. So off I went. It wasn't a vocation or anything like that. It was simply practicality. But yeah, so there, 3 months later, I was in Hong Kong.
So where did you train? You trained in the barracks there, or lived in the barracks?
There's a police training school. It's still there. It's now called the Police Academy, underneath the Ocean Park monorail.
Opposite the old China Fleet Club.
No, now that's police headquarters. I ended up working there. So I know your old hangout at the China Fleet Club very well. But the training school was on the south of the island, near Aberdeen, if you can.
Right, okay.
Repulse Bay, that kind of area.
Yeah.
So that's,
and how long did you stay? You sort of moved up the ladder somewhat there.
Oh, yeah.
You became sort of involved in security, and then a political advisor to the Governor General.
Yeah. And that's what effectively took me into that. I was still diving, and I was a member of the South China Dive Club, and would still dive, now and then, but I wasn't teaching classes or anything. And then obviously the talk of the handover to China, began almost as soon as I arrived. The joint declaration was signed in '84. And then those of us who were working in the security side of things knew that our days were numbered, and that we wouldn't be working beyond 1997 anyway.
Yeah.
And that became, it was in 1984, it was the distant future, you didn't think too much about it. But by 91, 92, I was beginning to think, well, what am I going to do next? And we went on holiday to Micronesia. And I went diving, and we spent a month traveling around Micronesia. And went diving in all the various islands, and I thought, I think I'm going to do this. And I went back to Hong Kong and did some research on how you become a professional diver, and fell. At first I went to the BZAC people, and that was no good, because they weren't set up for any kind of commercial enterprises at all. And then I found a paddy shop called Mandarin Divers. And they were set up for people to go into the business, to go through divemaster and instructor and everything else. So that's what I did. and I
Who was
taught.
running that? Mandarin Divers. That was Paul Nielsen.
Paul Nielsen.
Yeah.
Well, a lot of the next stage in the story involved Paul quite closely, because I ended up, he did my instructor training, and then I ended up working for him and Mandarin Divers in my spare time. So in the daytime, I was a civil servant, and then I'd take my suit and tie off, put a dive t-shirt on, then go and teach in the local pool, and at weekends, you know, take people out diving in the balmy waters of Hong Kong.
Right. But then after you eventually left, you went back to Micronesia.
Well, Micronesia
and started a dive operation.
Yes, well, from that time, that was always in my mind. That's what I was going to do. You know, the whole idea I had, Guam was what I'd identified as the location. The other islands were just a bit too remote to run things. I had children who were school age, so I needed a place with schools, and also everybody who knew me in the dive industry was in Hong Kong. So I needed a place with direct flights to and from Hong Kong, because I knew Hong Kong would be my main customer base, certainly in the early days.
Right.
And with Paul Nielsen to go back a step, because we want to bring in Rob at some point here, who's, you know, our mutual friend Rob Casey. I'd done my PADI instructor, and I was teaching for Mandarin Divers. And Paul Nielsen, we went out for a drink one evening, and he said, I'm going to Australia to do some training, and I want you to come with me. And I'd seen an issue of Sub-Aqua magazine, and the headline was no pretty fishies. And it now a legendary magazine, but of course this was one of the early technical diving magazines. And so I heard, you know, something about technical diving, and Paul Nielsen said, well, this is what we're going to do. We're going to do nitrox and technical diving. We're going to spend a month with this guy in Australia, and we're going to learn what it's all about. And so that's what we did. So we went down to Sydney and spent a month with Rob.
Out of Fun Dive in Stanmore.
Fun Dive in Stanmore.
And this is where later, when you wrote that wonderful book, Scuba Confidential, you actually described, because I've obviously sort of had a look at it this past week, and it's one of the most delightful terms. This is about nitrox, and you're writing about it. Then in the early 1990s, we were finally liberated, released from tenebrous ignorance into the glorious light of awareness. Now, I have to say, Simon, I don't often see the word tenebrous written anywhere. And it was just such a wonderful description about nitrox. Yeah. So that was your first introduction to nitrox then with Rob.
I mean, as you'll remember, Rob had gone off to worship at the seat of the gods in the US.
Yeah, I took him to the airport that day when he went, and picked him up 5 days later when he came back.
5 days.
5 days.
Really?
Yeah.
But it really was the question of the one-eyed man in the land of the blind, wasn't it? There was
absolutely
in our area in the Asia Pacific. He was the only one who had any of this knowledge at all. I mean, you think nowadays the information is everywhere, but then it really was hard to get. You had, like he did, you had to cross an ocean to get it and then bring it back. And when you brought it back, you were the only. He had a lot of trouble in Australia.
Oh, we had there were enormous problems from all areas. The medical profession, one particular very prominent diving doctor sort of made the pronouncement that if God had intended us to dive, we should be breathing air. That was it. Air was the only thing worth breathing. Anything else would kill us. Bob actually organized a seminar, brought up John Lippman from Melbourne came up to talk about it, a lawyer, various diving doctors, and the hall was absolutely packed with dive operators. And the outcry, the gas of death. Yes. So nitrox was going to kill everyone that used it.
We're all going to die.
Yep.
Yep.
I'm still here.
Me too.
Yes.
But that was it. So Paul Nielsen and I went down together and did everything, and then did all the course, and then came back to Hong Kong and started teaching in Hong Kong and in the Philippines. Because at that time, I think Alex Santos at that time was in America doing his own training. And we went over there just before he started, or maybe it was even at the same time. And so we were both training in one particular year. I can't remember which year this is. It's probably 95, 96.
I know 96. Alex was also at that first tech conference that ADEX had organised, or ADEC as it then was. Yeah.
Maybe this was 95. But he was there. He was already teaching, and we both identified Porto Galera as as a good place to start. And we walked along the beach, basically knocking on the doors, saying, we have this stuff. We want to teach you about nitrox. And they said, well, don't want that. And we said, well, they said, why should we do this? He said, it's safer. And I said, we don't have a safety problem. And then we'd say, well, it allows people to do longer dives. And they said, longer dives? Not having that. Long enough. Get them out, dip them down, bring them back again.
Yeah.
And so, but finally, it was Captain Greg's and the La Laguna Beach Club who signed up for the first course that we ran anyway. And I think Asia Divers were doing a course the following week, maybe the following couple of weeks with Alex. And they became the first 3 dive centers in Asia.
Right.
To teach nitrox. And so that's how it
And
went.
what happened with Guam? When did you set up in Guam?
97.
Right.
97.
Oh, that was after this. Yeah.
After Hong Kong, yeah. So all the stuff that we did in the Philippines and in Hong Kong was while I was still the political advisor to the governor. So I had 2 hats, very different hats.
They would have been quite handy, wouldn't it? That sort of influence.
Oh, I'm not sure. Yeah, well, it wasn't. We didn't really have very much influence. You had good contacts, I suppose. Is more like it. But we, in the job I was doing, we were certainly behind the scenes rather than we had no prominence whatsoever.
How long did you run the operation in Guam for?
97 to 2003, so 6 years.
Right.
6 years.
What made you leave that?
Felt like longer. It was, well, a combination of things. A lot of personal issues, but the real, catalyst for leaving Guam was a typhoon in 97. At the end of 97, the shop got wasted by Typhoon Packer that came through and wiped out the island. And then there were no typhoons for the next 6 years. And in 2002, in about August 2002, another typhoon came through and again wiped out the dive shop. And all the various personal issues I had were effectively the common sense thing to do was to go back to the UK just for a few years. But of course, I had the dive shop to run. And I thought, well, I can't leave the business, and I couldn't find any managers. I looked for managers, decent managers for the business. I couldn't find anybody suitable. So then the typhoon came along and told me, that's what you've got to do. Now I'm going to waste the dive shop. Now you don't have a decision to make. and off you go. So that was it. I sat there amidst the ruins of my dive center and said, that's it, I'm out of here. And a month later, I was gone.
And Tim Rock had the same sort of problem there with he'd started a magazine, hadn't he, at the time?
Yes, same problem.
Yeah. Is that where you met Tim?
His magazine ended with Packer, I think, because he had, what was that, Pacific Below magazine, which was doing quite well. But Packer, that first typhoon I referred to, effectively took all the power. I mean, we got water back a couple of weeks later, but we didn't get power back for 4 or 5 months. Because Guam gets hit frequently by big typhoons, yet most of the power cables are above ground on poles. And every time the wind blows, the poles fall over. Afterwards.
Good for employment, though.
Apparently, yes.
Yeah.
So what happens when, after the after the wind stopped blowing, they put the poles back up and put the cables back up, and it's never going to happen again.
And sorry, just stepping back to the nitrox and the training with Bob Kasem, because you also did some training with Bob, or helping Bob, and conducting some.
Yes.
Because he was with IAN, or as it then originally was, IAND, and then it became INTD. You took on the franchise for that as well, didn't you?
I took on the franchise for Micronesia.
Right.
And when I moved to Guam. But before that, I helped him. He had an enormous area. He had basically INTD Asia Pacific. He had everything. And so I helped him do the instructor course for people like Kusu Seng in Singapore.
Right.
And Jerry Yip in Malaysia, and the Frost brothers over in Thailand. So I staffed the instructor course he ran for them. And then he brought up those FG3 rebreathers.
The FGT-1As.
That's the one. That's the one. The yellow ones.
And the reason that I asked, did you know Bruce Thompson? The FGTs were part of the equipment run by the National Safety Council of Australia. This organisation that was a little bit like the Thunderbirds series on television with the puppets, and Thunderbirds Are Go. And it was there to rescue people in distress. It covered every sort of imaginable field of rescue, including obviously diving. And it was a privately run organisation. Bruce Thompson had left the employ of the Sultan of Oman's Navy and was on his way back to become diving officer for the National Safety Council of Australia when it folded while he was mid-flight. So the National Safety Council collapsed, and fairly obviously there was an auction of all of their assets, including the rebreathers that they had acquired from the Royal Australian Navy, the semi-closed circuit rebreathers. So Bob went along to the auction and wound up with some rebreathers. And that at a time, of course, when in terms of recreational diving, certainly here in Australia, rebreathers were a definite no-no.
No.
So
you know where he could bring them? Thailand.
Yes.
And that's what happened. So we got a message from Bob saying, how do you fancy learning to dive on a rebreather? And we said, yes, okay, we can do that. So we all met in a hotel in Phuket, and he brought these 2 units with him. And there was myself and Su Seng and Jerry Yip and the Frost brothers and another couple of guys from their operation. They had Southeast Asia liverboards, I don't know if you remember, based out of Phuket. Anyway, we were all there, and that was it. And we had these two rebreathers. So we'd go out in pairs and get our time in on the rebreathers, and Bob would read the manual the night before and then tell us what was in it the following day, and it was pure guesswork. And we had there were 2 of us, myself and another chap, and Bob was on open circuit because he only had 2 rebreathers, and obviously in those days anyway, a rebreather instructor was on open circuit because nobody in the recreational world, in the sport diving world, had sufficient experience on a rebreather to be that comfortable on a rebreather that, you know, you'd be able to devote your entire attention to your students. So he was on open circuit, and he ran out of gas, so he had to go back to the beach and change tanks. And the two of us were sitting there out in the ocean in about, I don't know, depth of about 10 meters or so. And my buddy passed out. He seemed absolutely fine, and then he was gone. He was completely out cold. And I thought, ooh, better get him up. So held on to it. I mean, it's basically open circuit rescue routine, really. And got him to the surface and floated him. And as he was lying on his back, he sort of, he came to and gasped and said, well, what the hell happened? And Robert appeared. He said, what are you two doing on the surface? I thought, I told you to stay down. You know, you've got dive time to make up. That's why you have to be down there. I've got to get these hours locked. And I explained what happened. So that was the end of that dive. And it was a blocked injector. The oxygen injector had become blocked because we hadn't been maintaining these things properly. And God knows when they were last maintained. And it had become blocked. And so the guy hadn't been getting any oxygen feed. And gradually, you know, the oxygen in his loop was depleted, and he went hypoxic. So there you go. So that was an early rebreather rescue.
Yes.
Probably one of the first.
It'd probably been so long since they were last used, anyway.
Given what you know of the history, which we didn't know at all, you know, Robert just turned up with these machines. As far as we were aware, he just bought them, you know, from the factory. Although,
well, I always used to maintain that I taught Bob everything that he knew because he used to be my assistant. And then I realized I didn't tell anyone anymore.
No, quite.
Yeah.
You get blamed.
Yes.
Yes. But he was.
You had some fascinating experiences though with technical diving, expedition diving, because you also studied under Billy Deans, didn't you?
Yeah, Billy came out to Guam. I'd met Billy in Florida when I was doing my trimix training.
Right.
And I'd met him then, and I'd met him probably at the DEMA show, the DEMA in Miami, which would be 97 probably. And I'd met him there. And then when I went to Guam, a guy named John Bent, whose name you probably know, he was running something called Guam Tropical Dive Station, but he was also involved in a salvage operation concerning a galleon, a Spanish galleon that had gone down off the south coast of Guam hundreds of years ago, with apparently silver in the ballast. And he and his team wanted to recover the silver. And they'd been working on the site for 2 or 3 years, hadn't found very much except the odd musket ball, and decided that the silver must have fallen down the wall. And they got as far as recreational diving could take them. And he called me to the shop or something, or maybe I was in the shop, and he said, I need to go deeper and I need somebody to do this. I said, well, you know, I'm relatively new in this field, so I'm not your man. And I've got a dive shop to run anyway, but I know somebody who probably can help. And I said, contact this guy, Billy. And so he did. I think he probably had Billy's name on a short list anyway, but he contacted Billy. Billy said yes and brought a team out to Guam. And while he was in Guam doing that work, I went and did some diving with him on the project, because there weren't many technical divers around.
This was using trimix.
This was using trimix, and this was using open circuit trimix.
Right.
Then in subsequent years, Billy ran it for 2 years. In the second year, there was a death. We lost one of the safety divers. And the safety diver's job was to simply to go from the boat down to the decompression station, take the spare tanks, deliver spare tanks, you know, that kind of thing, and take the scooters off, take the magnetometers. We were using magnetometers to run over sand channels to try and find something metallic, you know, underneath. And that was the idea. And he was just, we guess, making too many ascents, even though it was only 10 meters down, 10, you know, back up again. He was just going up and down so many times that he got a bad bend, and he was rushed off to the recompression chamber, but died in the recompression chamber.
Wow.
And I think that incident, Billy had also lost another friend on a dive trip. Sometime, well, around the same time.
Right.
And he thought that, you know, he's had enough, and so he went off to become a nurse, I think a paramedic. That's how he left scuba diving.
He was, there's a quote of his that I often use with, in giving talks. And Billy Dean's, he was from Florida, one of the acknowledged pioneers, and his quote, technical diving is a philosophy, a mindset. Everything you do is based on making that dive absolutely perfect, because if you don't account for all of the parameters of the dive, you could get killed. It's a constant vigilance that wears on a human being, and to do it well, you have to live, eat, breathe technical diving. And
that quote is even more, that's even more relevant when you think of what I was just talking about, how the constant vigilance wears on you.
Yeah.
And I think what one of the things that may have had a massive impact was that in those days, our quest was to know everything. That was the whole point of technical diving. But it was a quest. It remains a quest today. But the quest meant that we didn't know everything, that we tried desperately to cover every one of the parameters. And then when you lost a diver, you realized that you hadn't covered all the parameters. And even though there's no question that the diver's name was Walt, that Walt's death was Billy's fault, not at all. But as you know, you take responsibility for it. It must wear on you considerably. And that's, you know, that's certainly it's certainly a factor in him leaving to raise the mood a little. Walt was buried in Guam, or the funeral was held in Guam, and the only people Walt knew in Guam were the divers from the project and the staff of my dive shop, and he knew the girls from the clubs in Tumon Bay, and all the girls were invited to the funeral. Of course, everybody who knew Walt was there, and basically it was girls from the clubs and divers, and it was in a church, a Catholic church, and Walt was a Catholic, and we were all sitting there as divers at the back, and we haven't got a clue what to do, and everybody's standing up and sitting down and saying words and things, and we're just completely lost, until one of the guys, out of the corner of his mouth, he said, "Just watch what the girls are doing," because they were all good Catholic girls, you see, and they knew everything. They knew all the moves, so we just watched what they did and followed followed their example. So when they stood up, we stood up, and they sat down, we sat down. When they knelt, whatever they said, we listened, and then repeated.
Yeah. You went back a second time, didn't you? Searching for that same wreck? Was there another?
Well, yes. After Billy finished, Kevin Gurr, he'd been part of Billy's team in year 2, and he took over the project in year 3. I think Kevin, he may have come out 2 years in a row, but certainly that's this particular one. And this time, everything was on rebreathers. And
was Wings stock in that one?
Yeah, that's it. Wings was along. Yes, Wings was there. And they had another guy named Reg from Canada, and Reg dropped out. And so Kevin came to the shop and asked if I'd take Reg's place. And that was that. So I did finished off the work in his place. So it was Wings, and it was Phil Short and Kevin and Andy McCrossy, who was the expert as far as wrecks and Spanish galleons and things were concerned. And it was all on rebreather, and it was on Inspirations and Mark 15s. And probably at the time, it was the most extensive operation that had ever, sport diving operation that had ever been done with rebreathers, because we were doing several hours a day, several divers, several hours a day, and every day. So good experience.
And I take it the wreck was never found, or the silver was never found, or not that anyone admitted to finding it.
No, it wasn't found. It probably wasn't there.
Yeah.
What probably happened was that the ship was wrecked on top of the reef, and that they got the silver off, and and it was melted down and disappeared somehow, because they managed to get enough wood off the ships to build 2 smaller ships and eventually sail off to the Philippines. So, the argument always was that they would have been able to get the wood from the upper decks, but they wouldn't have been able to get the silver in the ballast. But you imagine if you've got, a valuable quantity of silver in the ballast, you're going to move heaven and earth to get that.
Yes, plug of the timber.
Yes.
Yeah. And you went to work for Kevin then, back in the UK.
Well, that was
work with Kevin with the computers and the rebreathers.
Yeah. Well, that was it. We'd sit on the boat during the project, and Kevin said to me, one day, he said, "You should come back to England and take over INTD from me," because he was the INTD licensee from the UK.
Yeah.
And I said, "Come back to England? Why would I ever do that?" And then, as I said, some of the personal reasons for leaving Guam were my children, my daughters, my 3 daughters, who needed to go to school, and they couldn't stay on Guam anymore and go to the schooling wasn't up to scratch, and so I went back to the UK while they finished off school effectively. And so I went round to see Kevin, and I said, "Remember you said you thought I should come back to the UK and take over INTD from you? Well, here I am." And that was that. So I took over the license for the agency, and working in the same office, I started getting drawn into the VR3 stuff, the dive computer stuff. And then Kevin started developing his first rebreather, the Ouroboros, and then he developed the Sentinel. And by that time, I was part of the company, and I had somebody else helping me to run INTD. And was trying to do both at the same time. But again, a lot of fun. And
is an absolute genius when it comes to rebreathers and computers.
Yeah. Well, he's now making stuff for the military.
Right.
God. Yes.
And I guess a lot of that combined sort of experience obviously was put to good effect, because you moved to Bali, back to Asia, and took up writing as a career.
Yes. Something I'd always wanted to do.
And I know you've done a number of books, but the one that was really sort of kicked you off as an author was the Scuba Confidential.
Yeah, that's it. That's the problem. It's like a number of rock bands. You have a good first album, and then you spend the rest of your life trying to live up to it.
Well, you seem to have done exceedingly well with that, with the other books. How many have you written now in that series? Quite a lot. There's Scuba Theological and
5 in the series.
Right.
Yeah. 5 in the series.
And they all cover...
It's all to do, that all began with Asian Diver and David Espinosa, really. That,
right.
When I was still in Guam, he used to be a dive guide in Bali. And he worked with a guy named Gary Bevan, who was an advanced guide from the UK. Have you met Gary Bevan? Do you know Gary? No,
but I know of him through dining with divers.
There you go. There you are. The golf ball story. Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And he, David Espinosa was at the time editor of Asian Diver. And he said, he asked Gary to write an article on rebreathers because they'd never done an article on rebreathers before. This would be 98, 99, something like this. And Gary said, well, I don't know anything about rebreathers, but I know someone who does. And so he put David onto me, and I did a piece on rebreathers for him. And then I kept writing stuff for Asian Diver. And this was about the same time you had your column at the back.
Oh, the Counter-Strike column, yeah.
Counter-Strike.
Yeah.
So I was writing articles, and over time you accumulate the a number of pieces, and they all seem to go down quite well. I got a good response from them. And then it was Robert Houston of Action Asia in Hong Kong who said you should do a book, and the book then it was going to be called Safe Diving, and Robert was going to publish the book, but then something went on with him in Hong Kong. I think he left Asian Diver, Action Asia or something like that anyway. And so it was all shelved. I kept doing magazine articles. Then we came to Bali and I found I had time on my hands. So I thought, well, I'll put these all together and make a book. And of course it became much more than just a collection of articles. And that was
it's
it.
One that's so, it's still, regardless of what level of experience you think you have, there's still so much good information in there. It's a book for everyone who dives, and a book that deserves to be reread by everyone who dives as well.
Thank you.
I certainly sort of enjoyed it, and quite a few yes moments when you're
yes.
yes.
Yeah.
Yes, I did that. Oh dear.
This is what Steve Weinman, who's the editor of Diver in the UK, who's been a wonderful supporter over the years. I do a column for Diver as well, and he's been a great supporter of the books. He calls it the cringe factor. He said,
when you suddenly wake up to the fact that, oh God, I've been doing that.
So he calls it. He did a piece on one of the books once called "Welcome to the Cringe Factor."
I can well understand. You also so how many books in the series? 5, you said. So that's Scuba Confidential.
Yeah, Scuba Confidential was the first one, and effectively it was
fundamentals.
It was all about knowledge, and
right.
The idea of Scuba Confidential was to give divers the knowledge that instructors and tech divers learn that could be useful to the divers at all levels, but they just don't get it. They don't have it unless you do the training, in which case, you miss out. Then Scuba Fundamental was to do the same thing for non-divers. The idea being that before you take a dive course, you should be informed as to what a dive course should entail.
Yeah.
And that helps you choose. It also helps you decide if it really is for you. Because if you walk into a dive shop and say, I want to learn to dive, they'll say, yep, sure, sign here. They won't assess whether you're suitable or you have a suitable experience to learn to scuba dive. So I covered that as well, the idea being to give people advanced knowledge of that. And then I did Scuba Professional to do the same thing for instructors. So a book that somebody who thinks they might want to become a dive instructor can pick up and see what it's really like.
Right.
And know also that if you are a diver and you walk into a dive shop and say, I want to be a scuba instructor, no one's ever going to assess your suitability for this job. This isn't an interview. They'll just say, yes, sign here. And you, most of the time, you will be a scuba instructor at the end of it because they know what they're doing. But many people go on that route and then find once they've got to the end of it and spent a couple of $1,000, it wasn't for them after all. So I thought it'd be useful if they had something that told them in advance what to expect. So forewarned is forearmed.
And then that was followed up with
Scuba Physiological.
Right.
So Scuba Physiological was JP Ambert. Do you know JP?
No.
Deep ocean specialist, used to work for Comex. And he and I worked together in the European days. And he came out over to Bali with his wife, Patricia. And we were sitting there at dinner. And he said, "You've done a couple of books." And I said, "Yes." He said, "How did it go?" I told him, how they've gone. He said, I said, "What's the matter?" He said, "Oh, we did a book and no one bought it." And I said, "What book was that?" And he said, "It's called The Science of Diving." And I said, "Send me a copy and, let me have a look at what you've done." And they sent me a copy, and it was written by scientists for scientists with no editorial control whatsoever on how they spoke. So it was as if one scientist was talking to another scientist. And the problem was that the stuff that they were writing about, once you figured out what it was, once you used a medical dictionary to work it out, was really good stuff. And it was things that we don't have within the, or we didn't then have within the sport diving arena. So I said to JP, I said, "Look, I can rewrite this for you in layman's terms." I said, "as long as the original authors are in agreement." So he put me in touch with those people, and they said, "Well, do a chapter." So I did a chapter, and they came back and they said, "Well, that was an easy chapter. Do this chapter." So I did another chapter, and they said, "Well, there's a few things here we need to change, but effectively it's all right." And I said, "Should we do the book now?" And they said, "Yes." So that was that. That became Scuba Physiological, and that, it's quite a slim volume, but some very good stuff in it. And none of it is mine. It's all their material. All I did was just put in terms that you and I can understand.
And you've also gone on to write some travel guides as well. Yes. So you did the one on Taiwan, isn't it?
Yeah, I did the one on Taiwan. That was one of last year's projects.
Right.
We had we have a friend in Taiwan, and we visited her. We've been in Taiwan a couple of times, and she said she wrote to us and told us about a dive operation in the south of Taiwan, which was taking a zero waste approach to their resort and their business. And Sophia is very interested in the zero waste.
Oh, absolutely, yeah.
And and she, at the end of her email, she said, "You should come over and dive with him. And by the way," she said, "my dream is that one day you write the first English language guide to diving in Taiwan." And so Sophia and I, talked for a while, and we looked on the internet and everything else. And I wrote back and I said, "You know what? I think we could do that." And I said, "This is what we need. This is what we think we would have to do." And the silence for about 6 weeks. And then we got an email from her saying it's all arranged. That's it. It's all been sorted out. And we spent a month in Taiwan with a group of Taiwanese divers, photographers, videographers, going around all the 6 diving areas in Taiwan. And the book came from that month. Great.
And you mentioned earlier Sophia and or Sophie and yourself. When it comes to the environment, you're both very, very active, in fact, on there. And to quote the lead into your recipe in that wonderful volume, Dining with Divers, your recipe for aubergine veggie balls.
Sophia's recipe, you understand?
No, you can cook. But you say, divers see at first hand the damage we are doing to our oceans. We observe the accumulation of trash in the water, and we despair at the decline in fish life and the loss of healthy coral reefs. We are, therefore, among the most ardent advocates of awareness. We stand at the environmental front line, so it is up to us to set an example. And indeed, the two of you sort of do. I watched with awe a lot of the things that both you and Sophie do in the recycling.
Yes,
yeah.
It's Sophie that drives us. She's got a real vision of what's needed. She has a very straightforward approach to it all. She's
right,
very good.
And she's spoken at one of the or some of the previous ADEX shows as well on the environmental platforms.
The best way to phrase that is she held her tongue.
Ah, right. Okay.
Yeah. Things weren't going as you well, things probably went exactly as you would imagine them going. And
yes.
And Sophie thought, well, I can say what I think here and upset everybody, or I can just let it pass. And this was no, we won't go into details on that one.
No.
Given our hosts this evening.
Now, your most recent book, The Diver Who Fell from the Sky.
Yes.
And this is an actual biography, isn't it?
It is. There are sadly too few diving biographies around.
Right.
Or autobiographies.
Yeah.
You possibly should think about penning an autobiography.
Yes, indeed. I sort of keep doing little bits of it and then throwing it out.
I mentioned this before.
Yes, you did. But I think after I told the story of smuggling an elephant on board ship.
That's right. Yes, this came from, again, this was a project last year. The book is about Francis Toribio, who is the guy who pioneered scuba diving in Palau.
Right.
And the story is quite astonishing. He almost single-handedly developed Palau as a tourist destination. And before that, it was simply an island, a tiny island in the Pacific, which the Americans planned to turn into an unsinkable aircraft carrier, part of the defensive ring that would protect America from another Pearl Harbor. And the people of Palau were, certainly in the early days, we're talking post-war 40s, 50s, even 60s, weren't consulted on these plans at all. And neither did they really have any say in their future. But what Francis Toribio did was he decided that he would start a dive center, and he would go to the US first and go around the world and tell people about Palau's diving and bring them to Palau. And it took him a number of years to get things going. But when he did get things going, then Palau's amazing natural marine resources did the rest of it for him. Well, what he did was he got people there and he got people talking. But he really was, as I say in the introduction to the book, there was no blueprint for what he did. This wasn't something the Pacific Islanders typically did, which was, go out into the world and tell people, shout from the rooftops, come and see us. But that's what he did, and it's quite an astonishing story.
How old is he, Simon?
He's now 73.
Right. Oh, a youngster.
Yes, a youngster. He's still around. He's long in retirement now, but he's had a fascinating life. His dad was a pearl diver who became a policeman in the Japanese era, who then became the leader of Palau's Congress, and then a Seventh-day Adventist preacher. And he was one of the leaders of the New Palau. And Francis was a rough and tumble boy who one day saw it must have been a US Navy diver, all tattoos and biceps and everything else, doing a recovery dive on a seaplane that had sunk in Palau Harbor. And he looked at this guy and he said, I want to be him. That's the guy I want to be. And from that moment on, he decided, you know, he'd be a diver, and he did everything he had to do. Because you think you're in this is the mid-60s, you're on a Pacific island, which no one in the world ever heard of. And you decide, you know, you want to go into the diving business. How on earth do you start that? How do you do an instructor course? How do you become an instructor? You don't have, you know, 2 pennies to rub together. And yet, yet somehow he achieved it all. And it's a sheer force of character, I suppose. Anyway, it's a great story. Yeah. And I felt honoured to be invited to write it. I know that may sound a little trite, but I feel quite privileged that he asked me to do it. And now it's done, and it's gone quite well. I think everybody who's bought it so far is in Palau, but I think a good proportion of the residents of Palau have bought a copy. But how are we doing for time?
There's some questions. Let me ask the questions. There's one from Brigitte Jager here in Sydney. Do tell us about the Tech 5 dive gear of those early years, late 70s, early 70s. About the tech, it must be dive gear. Do tell us about the tech dive gear of those early years, the late 70s, early 80s.
Not before my time, unfortunately. From tech diving wise, you can probably say a bit more.
Yes, it was just the Scuba Pro G250 regulator, some tanks.
Fenzi, what's it, jacket? Not a jacket.
If you were really, really sort of good, or the Scuba Pro stab jacket.
Right.
I still have things, by the way, in the garage.
Technical diving effectively began, well, people were cobbling their own gear together in the caves and on the wrecks in America, essentially, because they didn't have, you know, they weren't manufacturers. When did Dive Right come along? Sometime early 90s, 1991, something like that. No, the early equipment manufacturers who were making wings and harnesses, so people didn't have to make their own. I think that was probably then. Tech diving didn't exist as a concept until that era. Anyway, when was the first aquacore?
89, 90, yeah. Yes, I was just sort of trying to hark back a little bit, and I couldn't. It's also the problem, of course, was the gases here. I mean, air was readily available. Helium was just prohibitively expensive.
Yeah.
That's if you could actually get it to where you wanted it to be anyway for expeditioning.
Well, that's another reason I chose Guam, because there was a gas plant on the island.
Right.
And so helium and oxygen were very easy to get hold of.
Yeah.
And so it was perfect for doing technical diving. But yes, I mean, all the helium that you had to use to do an open circuit dive to 100 meters plus, and it just wasted, all blown into the ocean.
There's another one, another question. Joseph Guglielmelli.
Yes.
Simon, what year did you certify Francis with nitrox?
Oh yes, I did. I was Francis. I think it was probably 2001. Probably 2001.
Right.
Yes, I think so.
And I've just been told we're on the last minute.
Oh.
So Simon, where can people buy your books? Usually from Amazon, I take it.
Amazon, Apple, Kobo, Barnes and Noble.
And you've also done some work with Tim as well, haven't you?
Tim, we did a number of dive guides. We did Indonesia guides, best 50 dives in Indonesia. We did a diving and snorkeling guide to Bali, and another which was the diving and snorkeling guide to Raja Ampat in northeast Indonesia.
Right.
And I can see behind you a couple of books that you and I.
The Dining with Divers, the ones that we compiled. Yeah.
I believe.
Splendid books. And they're available from Amazon for the people.
Where else as well?
just for anyone that's interested in adventure, diving adventures and cooking, there's some wonderful recipes in there, some wonderful stories. So please rush out to Amazon and buy them and make Simon and myself rich and famous. Simon, thank you so very much for being here. What is this evening here in Sydney? It was wonderful to chat with you. Normally, of course, we'd catch up at the ADEX show in Singapore. That was not to be for this year. Hopefully, we'll be able to do it again at some stage and share a beer or two and tell more stories and talk further. So thank you once again.
Great
And
pleasure.
that, I guess I hand it back to Nora.
Hi, Nora.
Thank you, David. Thank you, Simon, for sharing with us these wonderful sharings on technical diving and also about nitrox gas. I wouldn't have known that it is that intense. That is actually a gas of death. Yeah, that's my key takeaway here. Okay, thank you very much for your time and for sharing all this with ADEX community. And we look forward to seeing both of you in ADEX 2021, hopefully.
Okay.
And also, David, I'll see you again in the next session.
Ah, yes, 2 weeks' time when we speak with Richie Kohler.
Yep.
Excellent.
That would be another fun one, I'm sure.
Yeah. So, Nora, thank you. El France, thank you. Simon, thank you so much. And we'll catch up again later.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.